Cormac McCarthy. What can be said about him that hasn't already been said? Dubbed as the heir to William Faulkner, Cormac McCarthy is my favorite author of all time. My first encounter with him began in the fall of 2009 when I picked up a copy of The Road, a post-apocalyptic novel about a father and son's arduous struggle to survive in an ashen, depeopled world. The Road demanded my attention from the first to the last page. Once I finished, I couldn't stop crying, and the rest is history. It's safe to say that if I never came across Cormac McCarthy, I never would have grown a passion for reading or writing. His precise prose, panoramic descriptions, bleak scenarios, distinctive characters, and philosophical themes are few of the many aspects of his writing that induce nothing but awe in me. Don't even get me started on his biblical allusions. I'm currently rereading what is considered to be his magnum opus, Blood Meridian, and I would just like to share a few passages from this indispensable book with you. Once I finish the novel, I might make an in-depth video analysis on the myriad themes and allusions in the book. It will be a much more thorough and less sporadic video. That was pretty much my Kafka's in the Penal Colony video. So, with all that being said, just sit back, relax, and enjoy some of the most evocative and haunting passages from my favorite author of all time. The first passage involves Judge Holden, as he is taking a lot of butterflies and putting them in his ledger because he likes studying everything about the natural world. And a friend of his, or a part of his gang, rather, named Toadvine, asked him a question. So I'll begin with this passage. They moved on. There were eagles and other birds in the valley, and many deer, and there were wild orchids and brakes of bamboo. The river here was sizable, and it swept past enormous boulders, and waterfalls fell everywhere out of the high, tangled jungle. The judge had taken to riding ahead with one of the Delawares, and he carried his rifle loaded with the small hard seeds of the nopal fruit, and in the evening he would dress expertly the colorful birds he'd shot, rubbing the skins with gunpowder and stuffing them with balls of dried grass and packing them away in his wallets. He pressed the leaves of trees and plants into his book, and he stalked tiptoed the mountain butterflies with his shirt outheld in both hands, speaking to them in a low whisper, no curious study himself. Toadvine sat watching him as he made his notations in the ledger, holding the book toward the fire for the light, and he asked him what was his purpose in all this. The judge's quill ceased its scratching. He looked at Toadvine. Then he continued to write again. Toadvine spat into the fire. The judge wrote on, and then he folded the ledger shut, and laid it to one side, and pressed his hands together, and passed them down over his nose and mouth, and placed them palm down on his knees. Whatever exists, he said, whatever in creation exists without my knowledge, exists without my consent. He looked about at the dark forest in which they were bivouacked. He nodded toward the specimens he'd collected. These anonymous creatures, he said, may seem little or nothing in the world, yet the smallest crumb can devour us, any smallest thing beneath yon rock out of men's knowing. Only nature can enslave man, and only when the existence of each last entity is routed out and made to stand naked before him, will he be properly suzerain of the earth. I love this passage. This is one of the many philosophical passages in the novel, and they are usually quoted to Judge Holden. In this passage, Holden is essentially saying that everything in nature is over us. We like to think as humans that we have control and dominion over all things, but that is not so the case. As in the days of what we are going through now with COVID-19 and other diseases that are bound to happen on us sometime, it is constantly proven that germs and nature always has dominion over us. And with this passage, Cormac McCarthy gives Judge Holden, who is arguably the most horrifying character in Western literature, the words of something that, in all honesty, comes off as a bit of a threat, because it seems as if this is a God talking to us, especially when he says with such competency, "Whatever in creation exists without my knowledge exists without my consent." Who among us, random, average people, would have the gall to say such a haunting statement? If you were to read Blood Meridian, you would understand how Judge has the authority and the withal to say such a damning passage. This final passage comes when the kid, who is the main character of the novel, has been left behind by his crew of the Glanton gang, and he has to trek by himself through the wilderness to find them back. In this description, it's midnight, it's dark, it's blacker than black, and he sees a faint light in the distance that he's crawling towards. And the passage I'm about to read to you now is the description of what he sees. It was a lone tree burning on the desert, a heraldic tree that the passing storm had left afire. The solitary pilgrim drawn up before it had traveled far to be here, and he knelt in the hot sand and held his numbed hands out, while all about in that circle attended companies of lesser auxiliaries rooted forth into the inordinate day, small owls that crouched silently and stood from foot to foot, and tarantulas and salpugas and vine garoons and the vicious mygal spiders and beaded lizards with mouths black as a chow dog's, deadly to man, and the little desert basilisks that jet blood from their eyes, and the small sand vipers like seemly gods, silent and the same, in Jeddah, in Babylon. A constellation of ignited eyes that edged the ring of light, all bound in a precarious truce before this torch whose brightness had set back the stars in their sockets. This passage, when I first read it all by myself inside my head as I was reading it, gave me shivers. This description is honestly one of the most haunting images I have yet to come across in the novel. It is dark, it's the blackest you can think of, but out in the desert, there's a single burning tree, and the kid, who has been freezing because he was up in the mountains and it was snowing, is now down here. He's warming himself, but he can see that there's a myriad of different insects, all different kinds that are around him. And they, like him, are staring at the burning tree, and they are wanting warmth. But the description that really gets me the goosebumps is how it's described as if this man, with these other insects that we don't ever think about, insects that we would freak out at if we saw them, that they are actually in this truce with this man, and that this is some sort of like pagan ritual or vigil in a way, and the description that it's so bright out in that darkness that the stars are essentially vanished because it's so bright to where they are. It just gives me shivers. It's such a haunting description, and how the way McCarthy gets away with that, he is the only writer I can think of who could get away with describing such a obscure, I would never word it that way to describe that scenery. Maybe that's just me, or maybe there can be someone else, but man, it is truly haunting. With all of this, I would just like to say that if you are into evocative writers who can really just describe some of the most insane descriptions, who are wordsmiths, who can really reach the depths of human imagination, as well as question everything that you can think of about morality, about man's role in the universe, then you should read Cormac McCarthy, my favorite novelist. And with this being said, I would just like to let you know that once I finish Blood Meridian, I plan on writing an in-depth video essay on this. Send me comments if you would like to see an in-depth analysis of Blood Meridian. And also like this video if you like it, and also think about subscribing if you're into this kind of stuff. With all of that in mind, guys, thank you so much.